In 1974, two psychologists named Dutton and Aron conducted a study in Vancouver, Canada, that changed how scientists understood the relationship between the body and emotion. They identified two bridges at a popular tourist location. The first bridge was solid, wide, low to the ground, safe in every measurable sense. The second bridge was a narrow suspension bridge, 230 feet above a rocky riverbed, swaying slightly underfoot, with loose cable handrails, and a drop that most people found immediately alarming. As men crossed each bridge, they were approached by an attractive woman who asked them to complete a brief survey. When she returned their completed forms, she offered her phone number in case they wanted to follow up about the study. The researchers then waited and counted who called. The men who had crossed the terrifying suspension bridge were significantly more likely to call the woman afterward than the men who had crossed the stable bridge. Not slightly more likely, significantly. The researchers' explanation was precise and once stated, impossible to unsee. The men on the suspension bridge had elevated heart rates, accelerated breathing, heightened alertness, activated nervous systems, the full physiological profile of fear. And when the attractive woman appeared in the middle of that physiological state, the brain, which does not receive a separate chemical signal telling it why the body is activated, made an attribution. It read the racing heart, the heightened alertness, the physical urgency, and called it attraction, because attraction feels in the body almost exactly like fear, and the brain had to decide what this was. It decided her. Welcome to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. I'm Dr. Evan Cole, behavioral psychologist and behavioral analyst. If you have been watching this series, you have followed the relationship arc through 4 previous videos. Why people stay in relationships that are destroying them, the psychology of the narcissist who runs those relationships, the solitude intolerance that makes leaving feel more dangerous than staying, the self-deception that allows both people to revise what happened into something survivable. Today, the mechanism underneath all of it. The reason a relationship that keeps your nervous system activated feels, from inside the nervous system, like the most important relationship you have ever been in. Neuroscience of why anxiety and love feel identical in the body, and what the brain does with that identity when it needs to decide what it is experiencing. The phenomenon has a name in psychology: misattribution of arousal. The two-factor theory of emotion, developed by Schachter and Singer in 1962, established that emotional experience is not a single event. It is 2 events happening in sequence. First, physiological arousal. The body activates, heart rate elevates, breathing changes, the autonomic nervous system moves. Second, cognitive labeling. The brain looks at the activated body and asks, what is causing this? The label the brain assigns, based on context, environment, and the personal history of the person doing the assigning, becomes the emotion. This is the architecture that makes misattribution possible. The body does not produce separate signals for fear, excitement, and romantic attraction. It produces one signal: activation. And the brain, looking at an activated body in the presence of another person, assigns the label that the context makes most available. On a terrifying bridge with an attractive stranger, attraction. In a relationship that keeps the nervous system in a state of uncertainty and alert, love. What is happening inside the brain during misattribution is now understood at the neurological level. The autonomic nervous system operates through two branches: the sympathetic branch, fight or flight, activation, alertness, elevated heart rate, cortisol, and adrenaline moving through the system. The parasympathetic branch, rest and digest, calm, regulated, the baseline state of a body that is not under threat. Romantic attraction activates the sympathetic branch. So does fear, so does anxiety, so does the hypervigilance of a person in a relationship they cannot fully predict. From the perspective of the autonomic nervous system, these states are physiologically indistinguishable. Racing heart, elevated cortisol, intrusive thinking, the inability to stop preoccupying with one person, these are the symptoms of anxiety. They are also, precisely, the symptoms of what most people call being deeply in love. The insula, the brain region responsible for interoception, the sensing and interpretation of internal body states, plays a critical role in this misattribution. The insula receives signals from the body and translates them into felt experience. But the signal it receives does not arrive pre-labeled. The translation, the assignment of meaning to the physical sensation, happens in the moment, informed by context, expectation, and the emotional frameworks the person already holds. A person who has a history of anxious attachment, who learned early that love is inconsistently available, that connection can be withdrawn without warning, that staying close requires constant vigilance, carries an emotional framework that maps activation very readily onto love. Because for them, love has always felt like this: urgent, uncertain, accompanied by the physical state of a nervous system that cannot fully rest. They enter a relationship that produces that same activation state. The insula translates the signal through the only framework it has. This is what love feels like. This is the mechanism underneath the pattern examined in video 5. Why people stay in relationships that are destroying them. The relationship that keeps a person in a state of nervous system activation through unpredictability, intermittent reinforcement, the cycle of rupture and repair, produces more physiological arousal than a stable, secure relationship. And because arousal, cognitively labeled, becomes emotional intensity, the activated relationship feels more like love than the quiet one. Not because it contains more love, because it produces more activation. The person in the stable relationship who feels nothing is missing, who finds the absence of anxiety suspicious, who waits for the other shoe to drop, is not emotionally unavailable. Their nervous system has not been given anything to activate, and a nervous system that is not activated does not produce the signal the brain has learned to call love. The stable relationship feels like the wrong relationship, not because it is, but because it does not feel like any relationship this person has ever understood as real. The misattribution does not happen equally across all people. It is most pronounced and most consequential in people with anxious attachment styles. Anxious attachment develops in early environments where connection was inconsistently available. The caregiver was sometimes present and attuned, sometimes absent or unavailable, and the child could not predict which version would arrive. The nervous system of that child learned to stay activated, not because activation is pleasant, because activation is the appropriate response to an environment that cannot be relied upon. The hypervigilance is adaptive. It keeps the child alert to the signals that predict whether connection is available or withdrawn. That nervous system enters adulthood intact, and it continues to read activation as appropriate, as the correct response to the presence of someone who matters. The result is a consistent pattern of attraction toward people who produce the familiar state, the unpredictable person, the one who is sometimes warm, sometimes withdrawn, the one who produces the uncertainty. The anxious nervous system was built to resolve through pursuit and constant monitoring. That pattern does not feel like anxiety running a relationship. It feels like finally meeting someone worth fighting for. There is something specific that people with anxious attachment frequently report when they encounter, sometimes for the first time in their adult lives, a genuinely secure relationship. They describe it as boring, not the way a Tuesday afternoon is boring, the way that something important seems to be missing, a charge, an urgency, a quality of aliveness the previous relationships produced, and this one, inexplicably, does not. What is missing is the activation. The nervous system is not firing, the cortisol is not elevated, the hypervigilance has nothing to monitor, and because the brain has learned to label activation as love, the absence of activation reads as the absence of love. Person is experienced as someone the anxious person does not feel strongly enough about, when the opposite is almost certainly true. The absence of activation is not the absence of love. It is the presence of safety. And a nervous system that has never experienced safety as compatible with love will read safety as the signal that this is not the relationship, and return to the one that was. The research is cautiously optimistic and precise about what changing it actually requires. The misattribution pattern cannot be corrected by deciding to feel differently. A person cannot choose to find the stable relationship activating, or choose to stop reading the anxious relationship as love. The labeling happens at the level of the insula and the autonomic nervous system, below the threshold of conscious decision. What can change, and what research demonstrates does change, over time, in the right conditions, is the nervous system's baseline. A person who, through sustained therapeutic work and the slow accumulation of secure relational experience, gradually shifts their nervous system toward regulation, begins to notice something unexpected. The stable relationship starts to feel like more than nothing, not dramatically, not all at once, but the absence of alarm stops reading as absence of love. And what was previously experienced as boring and begins to be experienced as what it has always been. The bridge study that opened this video is, at its most precise, a study about the limitations of introspection. The men on the suspension bridge believed they were reporting an accurate internal state when they described their attraction to the woman. They were not lying. They were not performing. They were doing what every human being does in every moment of emotional experience, feeling a physical state, assigning it a name, and trusting that the name is correct. The research says the name is often wrong, not because the feeling is not real. The feeling is entirely real. The body is activated. The heart is racing. The nervous system is firing. But the brain that names it love when it is fear, that names it intensity when it is hypervigilance, that reads the absence of alarm as the absence of love, is working with the only framework it was given. And frameworks, slowly, with the right information and the specific kind of courage it takes to stay in a room that does not feel urgent, can be rebuilt. If this gave you a name for something you have been feeling for a long time, that is the work this channel exists to do. Subscribe to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. Every week, the neuroscience underneath the behavior, the mechanism behind the pattern, the thing actually happening inside the experience that has never quite made sense from outside it. The full relationship arc is in the archive, Watch them in order if you want the complete picture. We'll see you in the next one.